legs and pull her to the water. That's the only one that I ever killed.
One quiet night, a laugh, a closing door, and someone doesn't wake up again. Alabama sleeps softly, too softly. Because here monsters don't hide under beds. They live next door. And tonight, we'll walk beside 5 of them, feel their footsteps, their choices, and the moment each one crossed from human to killer. Part 1. Samuel Little, the drifter who drew faces. He moves like a ghost across America. He's map of small towns and forgotten roads stitched together by cheap motels and parking lot cigarettes. In some places, he's a stranger offering a ride. In others, he's a neighbor who says hello. To Samuel Little, the world is a stream of faces, and he remembers them like a collector remembers stamps.
The ones that you think you're going to kill?
Depends on how I met.
He was not flashy. There was no loud confession in his pockets, no dramatic theater, just the habit of watching, of choosing, and of closing a hand around a throat. The signature was strangulation, the steady pressure until the body went slack.
And we went in and parked.
For years, the deaths slipped into other categories: overdose, exposure, misadventure. Families closed caskets without explanation. Files gathered dust. Then, decades later, the voice arrives. Arrested for an unrelated crime, Little sits in a small interview room and speaks like a man cataloging things. He draws women full faces, hairlines, the exact tilt of an ear. He tells
Pull her by the legs and pull her to the water.
detectives where he left a body, what the victim was wearing, what she had for breakfast. His memory is grotesquely precise. With each confession, an investigator reads a case file anew, a photograph buried in a cardboard box, a funeral program, a neighbor's fading affidavit. Pieces begin to lock together, not instantly, but like clockwork finding its rhythm. A Polaroid here, a ledger there, a name scrawled on a hospital intake form. Detectives compare notes across jurisdictions, phone calls span states, and overnight the old cold case board becomes a web of human lives. Families who once accepted silence now confront a man who says he remembers entire evenings that no one else could place. An image forms in the mind. A detective, late, in a fluorescent room, holding a pencil sketch while a family looks on through a pane of glass. The sketch looks like a woman they never
He went into great detail on his crimes.
Oh, the only thing I know is that I killed him.
And that was your intent?
That was my intent.
found, and then suddenly they remember a girl who disappeared in the late 1970s. It is a terrible confirmation, a mixture of relief and rage, but it is closure where there was none. The confessions reopen grief and force history to be redrawn. In the weeks after Little's confessions went public, cold case investigators worked like graveyard shift surgeons, carefully opening files, re-examining embalming reports, and calling relatives who had folded away grief like a coat. Some of the conversations began with hesitation. We found someone who might know, and ended with the raw, messy business of memory. Families oscillated between anger and gratitude, anger that their loved one had been violated, and gratitude that someone finally said the name aloud. Walking beside Little is to feel time accelerate, years collapse into a single breath. You watch as police match a
Did you have any conversation with her?
My mind was on killing her.
And hear from the
memory to a grave, and in doing so, bring a family back into a room they thought long closed. You hear the hush of a courtroom, the rustle of paper, the long list of names that finally align into a story. But ask yourself, how many other names in Alabama will he whisper before this night is over? And if he can remember so
Did you ever shoot any of these girls?
Shoot.
Yeah, with a gun?
many faces, who else is on his map? That question pulls us forward to a new trail.
It's like a belt.
Part 2. Thomas Wisenhant. Imagine someone who cannot resist returning, who cannot bear to let the place where he made a choice stay empty of his shadow. Thomas Wisenhant lived with that compulsion. He hunted in the hum of small towns where late-night clerks and lone walkers dissolve into the background. He took advantage of familiarity and routine, the casual trust people offer at odd hours. His violence was personal and ugly: abduction, assault, a casual cruelty that left more than physical marks. He would leave, and then he would go back, either to linger at the edges or to insert himself into the myth that grew around the crime. It was as if he wanted to watch the horror bloom, to observe the way panic rippled through a neighborhood. The small acts that give a predator away are patience and hubris. Wissenhant had both. For the community, detection felt accidental. A witness remembered a car idling the night something went wrong. A neighbor saw a man who lingered too long. Those small recollections, at first dismissed, became threads. Detectives followed them like bloodied footprints. When they confronted Wissenhant, he could not sustain the fiction. He spoke. In his confession, the details spilled places, sounds, the gasp he heard when life ended. The trial was a public accounting of private horrors, a community's ritual of naming what could no longer be unnamed. Photographs were displayed, witnesses cross-examined, and the small-town papers printed every turn. For people who lived near where it happened, the name itself became a wound that would not scab. Wissenhant's sentence closed one chapter, but it could not close the echoes left in bedrooms and at counters where victims once stood. If you followed his steps, you'd feel the arrogance of a man who thought he could look on his crime from the safe side of the darkness. But arrogance is fragile. It shows up as a witness statement, a neighbor's recollection, a hair on a coat that should not be there. That same fragility will be central in our next walk, across state lines, where a single fingerprint can rewrite a lifetime. Part 2. Thomas Wissenhant. Imagine someone who cannot resist returning, who cannot bear to let the place where he made a choice stay empty of his shadow. Thomas Wissenhant lived with that compulsion. He hunted in the hum of small towns where late-night clerks and lone walkers dissolve into the background. He took advantage of familiarity and routine, the casual trust people offer at odd hours. His violence was personal and ugly: abduction, assault, a casual cruelty that left more than physical marks. He would leave, and then he would go back, either to linger at the edges or to insert himself into the myth that grew around the crime. It was as if he wanted to watch the horror bloom, to observe the way panic rippled through a neighborhood. The small acts that give a predator away are patience and hubris. Wissenhant had both. For the community, detection felt accidental. A witness remembered a car idling the night something went wrong. A neighbor saw a man who lingered too long. Those small recollections, at first dismissed, became threads. Detectives followed them like bloodied footprints. When they confronted Wissenhant, he could not sustain the fiction. He spoke. In his confession, the details spilled places, sounds, the gasp he heard when life ended. The trial was a public accounting of private horrors, a community's ritual of naming what could no longer be unnamed. Photographs were displayed, witnesses cross-examined, and the small-town papers printed every turn. For people who lived near where it happened, the name itself became a wound that would not scab. Wissenhant's sentence closed one chapter, but it could not close the echoes left in bedrooms and at counters where victims once stood. If you followed his steps, you'd feel the arrogance of a man who thought he could look on his crime from the safe side of the darkness. But arrogance is fragile. It shows up as a witness statement, a neighbor's recollection, a hair on a coat that should not be there. That same fragility will be central in our next walk, across state lines, where a single fingerprint can rewrite a lifetime. What else will that print reveal? Third, Daniel Lee Siebert. Daniel Lee Siebert cut across state lines with the ease of someone who believed in the anonymity of movement. Travel was his cloak: motel sheets, seasonal jobs, different license plates. He selected moments when people let their guard down. Inside an apartment where a door was left unlocked. In a campus corridor where trust was a default setting. There is a brutality to Seibert that is not theatrical, but focused stabbing, bludgeoning, killing in rooms where trust had been granted. He used the small kindnesses of strangers, an invitation for coffee, a ride to get inside the closing door. Then the violence happened close to the body, almost intimate in its speed. He didn't parade cruelty. He enacted it up close until the world ended for one person, while geography was his ally. Jurisdictions don't always speak to one another, and a body in one county can be a separate mystery from a body in the next. But fingerprints are merciless. They cross borders and timelines. The day a set of prints matched a print on file was the day Seibert's map stopped erasing him. The corridor of quiet evidence, semen reports, blood traces, a motel register aligned. Arrest followed not as spectacle but as the inevitable consequence of accumulated proof. He faced courts and prosecutors revealed patterns of travel and violence that had once been invisible. In Alabama, the campus that should have been safe became a wound the community tended in public and private. Survivors spoke, grief became official record, and the slow machinery of trial began its work. Seibert's prosecution showed another relentlessness, the way institutions can catch up to itinerant violence through meticulous record-keeping. Courtrooms filled with dated motel receipts, with shipping records, with ledger books that seemed banal until they were suddenly damning. Universities and institutions that once prided themselves on being open communities found themselves rethinking access and safety protocols. Discussions about background checks and community alert systems began in coffee shops and dorm lounges. Walking with Seibert is to understand how a life of movement can be a form of arrogance and illusion. He thought roads would swallow him, and for a time they did. But science and patience walked faster. And yet pattern recognition and routine work are not the only ways killers end up exposed. Sometimes the quiet violence of a kitchen reveals another truth. Who would ever suspect a mother pouring the tea? 4. Audrey Marie Hilley. Audrey. Marie Hilley's story is a study in domestic theater. The kitchen table is stage, the applause of neighbors who saw a perfect house, the private acts that never punctured that image. Her knowledge of chemicals made her dangerous in a way few other killers were. She mixed what people trusted, medicine, tonic, soup, with what would break them from the inside. The slow work of arsenic is cruel precisely because it masquerades as time. Victims lose themselves in symptoms doctors commonly see and treat. When a husband collapses into what looks like hepatic failure, the assumption rests with biology, not with betrayal. Audrey exploited the trust in professional diagnosis and the tendency to attribute tragedy to fate. Each apparent accident was a small triumph, a secret kept intact by a community's goodwill toward a woman who was also a mother and a wife. Yet arrogance bakes mistakes. The survival of her daughter introduced a variable she had not accounted for. A living witness of similar symptoms shifted the case from whisper to test. Toxicology reports exhumations, and a web of paperwork show the pattern. Investigators who had accepted death certificates began to ask uncomfortable questions about commonalities. Who served the meals? Who refilled medicine bottles? Who benefited from life insurance? Audrey did not just commit murder and then wait. She wove a new identity. She faked her death. She rewrote the story to be about grief. When the facts began to contradict her narrative, a forged death certificate, a mismatch in paperwork, detectives began to pull at the thread. She fled and hid, moving through towns under assumed names, sometimes staying in the shadows of places she had once known. But lives leave traces. A returned library book, a credit card transaction in a small store, a neighbor who remembers a new face with a familiar gait. Those small bureaucratic footprints are cruelly honest. Detectives followed them like hunters. She was found. She was tried. The household that had seemed benign now became a study in betrayal, where the instrument of care had been the instrument of harm. When you move with Audrey, you enter the quiet cruelty that looks like care. You wonder, who else is able to hide cruelty behind competence? But the next story pulls us out of the kitchen and into the city streets where violence happens in the open, under lights and cameras, where the crowd is a cover and every witness is a possible key. What does a modern hunt look like in a city wired with cameras and phones? 5. Damien McDaniel. The sensation of walking into a city after a mass shooting is a particular shock to the senses, a heat of adrenaline, the metallic tang in the air, the kaleidoscope of sirens and witness accounts. Damien McDaniel's case, an ongoing, charged legal drama, unfolded in that atmosphere where fear met forensic innovation and where hundreds of ordinary lives suddenly revolved around a courtroom calendar. These alleged crimes are public in every sense. They happen in clubs, on streets, outside restaurants, places where strangers gather and become accidental witnesses. The violence is quick and deadly, and the stakes are high because each incident can involve dozens of victims. That scale makes cohesion for investigators both necessary and difficult. Multiple agencies, overlapping evidence, dozens of cameras, and a city demanding answers. Technology played a role. Ballistics tied casings from one scene to another. Cell phones created a lattice of pings that traced movement. Social media delivered both help and hindrance tips that led to breakthroughs and misinformation that distracted. The arrest was not a single heroic moment, but the product of countless small leads filed into hours of warrant paperwork. Detectives pieced together CCTV frames, matched timestamps, identified cars, and traced the social networks that circled around suspects. Families waited in courtrooms, clutching the names of those they had lost. Public debate erupted about safety, policy, and the line between prevention and surveillance. For a city, the trial felt like a test of its own resilience. To walk alongside this phase of the story is to feel the modern interplay of public panic and procedural law. An arrest does not erase the terror. It starts a legal story that may end years later in a courtroom, where guilt must be proven and where families wait for the slow machinery of justice. The city's heartbeat continues in fits and starts, vigils, protests, debates about policy, and an exhausted hope that a single case can teach more than it destroys. McDaniel's allegations pulled a community into a mirror it did not ask for. Nightlife slowed, conversations in bars cooled, the city wrestled with policy questions. More cameras, more policing, more community outreach, or something deeper that addresses the roots of violence. Those debates, ask anything, are messy, political, and human. They are not resolved with a headline or an arrest. They need time. We have moved in the footsteps of 5 people who changed lives and communities in different ways. Some confessed. Some were caught because of arrogance, or error, or forensic persistence. Some hid behind the ordinary. Some exploded in public view. Each story leaves residue. Grieving families, reopened files, forensic breakthroughs, and lingering questions. In the weeks and months after these cases reach headlines, communities do the slow work of adaptation. Streets get brighter, neighborhoods talk to one another more, institutions revise access and safety protocols, and conversations begin about social roots of violence, poverty, addiction, neglected mental health. Always another footstep in the night. The next time you hear the scrape of a shoe, listen, because sometimes the next story is only a breath away.